Hey, friends, welcome back to Positive Impact. I have a very special guest on today, a man that I've wanted to have on for a while now, the man behind the Ferrari of cold tubs, Jason Stauffer. Jason, welcome.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity here, and thanks for glad to be here.
All right, so Jason, he's up here in Bend, and we got to have dinner the other night and building a really nice relationship. And starting out, Jason, first off, I want to talk about your very open relationship with alcohol and some changes you've made recently. Can you share what's going on there and give us some insight?
Yeah, well, I haven't checked the app on my phone in a while now, but I think it's 33 or 34 days now since I decided to step away from alcohol. Really, was been thinking about it for a while now. There's a thought that's been going around in my head, like, maybe Jason, maybe we should quit drinking. Maybe this isn't quite serving us the way that it used to. Maybe it's time to make some adjustments. And that really came to a head recently in some significant ways. When I tell a story, any story that's true, you got to pick the arc because, the 45 minutes isn't enough to pack a lifetime in, especially, a lifetime of being a pretty moderate to heavy drinker. Since I was a teenager and then going into military service. And that's, a big part of military culture, at least it was when I was in. And then getting out of the military and just kind of continuing with that. But it all just came to a point where it was becoming problematic. And I could no longer deny that anymore. It was affecting my work. It was affecting my relationships. It was affecting my ability to offer what I want to offer to the world. And there was this pivotal moment where I was in a hotel room in Scottsdale, Arizona, and some relationship issues were going on, some business issues were going on, and for the very first time, in a way that I don't remember it being so present before, I got to the end of my work day. It was 5 o'clock. I crushed my email inbox, whatever. And I said, okay, I'm going to grab a bottle of wine. I'm going to have a drink. But there was a pain in my heart from sources that are still under investigation. But I could feel it. I could feel that kind of like that sinking feeling in my chest of, all the stressors that I had going on. And in a way that I'd never been consciously in the moment aware of before, I took that drink of alcohol and I could feel the numbing effect on the pain that was in my heart. And it reminded me of like the old Pepto-Bismol commercials, the one that coats is the only one you need is the tagline. And so, if you remember those commercials, I don't know if those commercials still exist. I don't know what Pepto-Bismol is doing these days with their ads. But that kind of like, that the medicine is coming down and it's like, relieving the symptom. And I sat there and I felt it. I felt it for the first time. And I felt it in a way that I knew that like the pain didn't go away. I just stopped being able to feel it. Because the stressors were still there. The relationship stressors, the business stressors, the financial stressors, like those don't go away when you stop feeling them. And I kind of said to myself in that moment, like, okay, now's time. Now is the time to just kind of step away from this indefinitely. And so the next day, I made some announcements to people close to me, and I made some announcements on social media. It was very important for me to do so, because I knew that as long as it was just a conversation I was having with myself, as long as it was just a thought that was in my head or a feeling that was in my chest of like, maybe it's time to reevaluate my relationship with alcohol, as long as that conversation was internalized, it wasn't going to get anywhere. Until I spoke it out loud, until I created some accountability for myself, which was very important. So I did that and just really started moving forward, and and just making the conscious decision to not drink alcohol. I've only told this story a couple of times. It's a pretty new thing in my life. But when I tell it, I come up with this disclaimers to anybody out there who's maybe thinking about reevaluating their relationships with alcohol or any other substance. Like, I'm not giving advice. I'm not telling anybody what they should do. I will tell you what has worked for me and what was important for me. And in this process, what was important for me was to pretty quickly go to places and engage in activities that I used to drink, but then just choose not to drink. Now, this is why I say I'm not giving anybody advice. Whatever works for you works for you. If going to the 12-step program works for you, going to the AA meeting works for you, if going to the gym 4 hours a day so you're not in a bar works for you, then do whatever works for you. But what worked for me was to go to the bar. Go to the bar and have the cheeseburger or the wings and just not drink, have an iced tea. Because not only do I still want to be able to do the other things that I enjoy, go to the places that I enjoy, eat the foods that I enjoy, go to the parties and dance, go to the clubs and socialize, but just do it in a way that was with different choices. It was very powerful for me to do that because I felt like I was winning. Like every time, like I won the round. And again, like I'll say it 12 more times, not advice. If going to a bar is too much for somebody, be like, no, if I go there, it's just going to be tequila shots until I'm, in a gutter somewhere. Don't do that. But for me, I found it very powerful to still go to those places, to be around people, friends who were consuming alcohol, which is very interesting when you become the person who's not consuming alcohol and you kind of see other people get a little inebriated under it. Observation without judgment. I'm not judging anybody. But having the same story or the same conversation 3 or 4 times because somebody's repeating themselves or whatever.
I was there.
Right.
I was there.
And you can, in many ways it's adorable. But it's very interesting. And so that was very powerful for me. And then I learned a phrase, which I guess is a pretty common phrase, but it's California sober, which just means that I'm not drinking alcohol. Like there's still other substances. There's some people who go in alcohol sobriety and then they give up coffee as well because it's a stimulant, it's a substance. But I still work with psychedelics. I'm still eating mushrooms, going on a hike. I'm still some other entheogens in both ceremonious and revelrous contexts. Cannabis is a good one. I've had some grace with myself because in this process, I have leaned on cannabis a little bit more and television a little bit more. So getting to the end of my day and instead of decompressing by inebriating myself with alcohol, it's like, all right, take a bong rip, watch some old South Park episodes. I don't want to be a couch potato, but having some grace for myself in that transition, that transitory period, has been helpful, powerful for me. And I feel good, going to the gym more, exercising more, socializing more, finding my voice more, which is very difficult because the alcohol would historically but would lower the inhibitions so that I was more, conversational and more, at least I thought I was wittier. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I just thought that I was funnier than I actually was. But refining the voice and stepping through the social awkwardness, because I do believe that part of what I got from my relationship with alcohol was that release of inhibitions and stepping into a more social, verbal, communicative, expressive individual. Now, the hypothesis that I'm testing, because I'm generally a man of science, is that all of the positive aspects that I could experience or have experienced using alcohol are attainable, and you can have them without the alcohol. There's just a transition period. And I've taken breaks from alcohol before. And I always know that like the boredom or the feeling of social awkwardness, those are the ones that are like, just grab the drink. But I'm dedicated to running a longer experiment this time, to really running, I say like 12 to 18 months, and being like, okay, the idea is the hypothesis I'm testing, that is, Jason can get to a place where he's as funny as he thinks he is, and as witty as he thinks he is, and as communicative and open and expressive as, he believed he was, drinking, only without the drinking. Because for me, if alcohol sobriety, if California sober was just sitting on the couch every night taking bong rips and watching old South Park episodes, that's not a forever solution for me. I got to find a different vibe. I got to find a different fulfillment, and there's got to be a little bit of a replacement. And I know from historical times that that's what has sent me back to drinking, is just getting like, I'm done being bored. I'm done feeling like I'm not expressive, or I'm not,
And I think that's the part, Jason, about finding your own way. There's not a one size fits all. It's been my experience, and you're finding your way, and you're very vulnerable and honest. And I really want to acknowledge you, because you're sharing your journey. You have a platform, you're using that platform for good, and being accountable with where you're at, and you're giving other people permission, especially men, Jason, of stepping into a new possibility for themselves, whether it's their relationship with alcohol, drugs, pornography, relationships with women. And so you're giving people permission to kind of evaluate their own relationship with certain things that are getting in the way of us becoming our best self. And so I really want to acknowledge you for that. And I also want to acknowledge you for your service. Thank you for your service in the military. I have a lot of respect for people in the military. And I know you're very open with your trauma that you've experienced in your life, both generational and PTSD related. And so, especially for us men, I know it's not the easiest conversation to have.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I say that I'm very fortunate with my military experience. I had, relatively speaking, it was not the most traumatic experience for me. I've got all my fingers, I've got all my toes. I never got shot at. I never had to shoot anybody. But through that journey, what I've come to understand or believe is that the experience in the military itself has like a base level of trauma. If you go through the training, congratulations, you've been traumatized. You've at least been broken down and reformed in a way that is traumatic. And there's this thing that I've observed in military culture and in military veterans, where every veteran does exactly what I just did, and they discount whatever small amounts of trauma they went through, because there's always somebody that had more. It's like I said, I've got all my fingers and I've got all my toes. And so when I got out of the military, it was like, okay, all right, cool, we got out. No trauma here. Which isn't accurate. It's definitely not the same as, service members who don't have all their fingers, all their toes, who had to make tough decisions, and who took a life, or who very nearly had their lives taken, or watched, people close to them, fall in combat. That's a different level. But what I've come to believe is that trauma exists on a spectrum, and to deny any point that you are on that spectrum is ultimately unhealthy. Because if you've got like one kernel of trauma, that you're denying, then that festers. That's like the bad apple that spoils the bunch, and it can lead to a lot of negative outcomes. And so that was helpful to me, and I hope that it's been helpful, because as wherever my military experience is at on the trauma spectrum, and it's not over there to that, got blowed up, had to blow up, but wherever it is, I at least have that base level of, I can speak the same language as other service members. I can associate with them on a certain core level. And I've had some conversations that I hope are at least helpful to wherever they are at on their trauma spectrum, on that trauma spectrum. And there's a book that I read that was really pivotal to this understanding. It's called Tribe, on Homecoming and Belonging. It was written by a combat journalist, actually. His name's Sebastian Junger. And he goes into kind of, he's trying to figure out why US service members have such a PTSD problem, and a problem specifically with the suicide rates. It's very commonly known that US service members have a very high suicide rate, both inside the service and once they get out of the service. And he's trying to figure it out, because here's a journalist who has spent a lot of time embedded with combat troops, and he's seen a lot of combat. You know, one could say it's its own traumatizing experience for him, because all he's got is a camera. He's embedded with people who have at least, you know, the means and the equipment to defend and assert themselves, and he's there with just taking pictures. But he formulates this hypothesis, which was very interesting to me. And what it is you can't just look at the experience that people go through in the military. You have to take that and put it up against the culture that has evolved in the United States. And the United States is one of the, if not the longest unchecked borders in like history. Like we don't have wars that happen at home. And so if you're not, you know, a service member who's been sent over, you know, to the other side of the world and experience that, then you live in this kind of very safe and very, you know, kind of affluent and agent society. You know, there's a lot of criticisms on it that are valid, but the United States is, you know, objectively, subjectively, you compare it to the rest of the world, and it's a pretty nice place to live. And it's a pretty low risk environment to live in. And we don't have, you know, borders that move, and we don't have combat operations that are very close to us. We've managed to kind of outsource that around the world. And so the service member gets this very different experience in the military, which is very hierarchical. It's very rank structured. It's something almost like pre-agrarian cultures, tribal cultures, in that there's a leader, there are, you know, soldiers, and there is a common mission of success, of survivability, of, you know, whatever. And you think that, so the service member gets this experience in their military experience. They come back to the United States, to a society that is increasingly individualistic. You know, people are kind of very self-centered in a way. They're freaking out over what? I have no fucking clue. You know, you like, everybody has the, you know, you got the right to protest, you got the right to free speech. I love that. But you're going to spend so much time and energy just shaking your fist at a system that you have, you know, microaggressional problems with. I'm like, just fucking read some books and do something with that. Trust me, your life is not that bad. You know, you have a lot of ability here. Like you're using your free time to assert whatever. That's great. But relatively speaking, like nobody is attacking you. Nobody is coming to your village and like pillaging you. Nobody is, you know, forcing your children to mine at gunpoint. Like, do something with that and realize that it gets a lot worse out there. And so it's just this kind of disconnect, this discordance between the mindset and the experience. And so it's that the hypothesis in Junger's book is that it's that difference, that kind of delta between the experiences that starts to become that festering of trauma in the service member. So it's not, I shot somebody, I got shot at, I lost a hand, I lost an eye. It's, I existed in this very tribal hierarchical society, and I've seen parts of the world where people will eat dirt if they're starving. And then I come back to the United States and people are like, my taxes are too high. And, you know, there's, you know, microaggressions about my gender expression and da, 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 da. And it's very real to their experience. It's very valid. It doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't make sense to us why people seem to kind of get locked into this. And so it's hard for us to associate. And so that's kind of, I don't know where I was going with that, but
well, you have a unique perspective. That's what when I hear you share that, Jason, you have a unique perspective, and that's why I have a lot of respect for people who serve in the military, because of the experience that you just shared. And for people listening, I think it's really important that people hear that perspective. And you know, so now I wanted to get to the good part. Like, for people listening, Jason is the president and CEO of Morozko Forge, the Ferrari of cold tubs. And as everybody listening knows from, you know, the past 145 episodes, I love the cold water exposure. Ice baths, ice tubs have been a big part of my life, a big part of my journey over the last couple of years. So what I'm stoked to find out, Jason, Morozko Forge, how did it start? And more importantly, where did the name come from?
Sure. I'll start with the name. Morozko is a Russian-Finnish fairy tale or mythology. And he's you can think of him like as a Father Winter type, or a Jack Frost. If you look at artistic representations, it almost looks like a Santa Claus type character. And there's a fairy tale that goes along with it. That there's this beautiful girl who lives in the Russian forest with her father, her stepmother, and her wicked stepsister. And the stepmother and the stepsister, they don't like her very much. They're very jealous of her. So the stepmother decides she's going to lead the little girl out into the forest and just leave her there for dead. It's very harsh. Like I said, it's Russian. So she does this, and the little girl is sitting in the middle of the forest, and she's cold and she's shivering, and Morozko is going around and he's freezing things because that's what he does. And he comes along the little girl, he's going to freeze her, and he stops first and he says, "Dear child, are you warm?" And the little girl answers him with stoicism and grace and says, "Yes, dear Morozko, I am warm enough." And so he doesn't freeze her because he's impressed by her. And so instead he takes her into his cottage, makes her princess of the forest, and gives her all of these jewels and all of these gifts. And so the stepmother catches wind of this, that not only is the little girl not dead like she intended, but Morozko has taken her into his cottage and given her all these jewels, all these gifts, made her a princess of the forest. And so stepmother says, "I know what I'll do. I'll recreate this. I'll take my own daughter, leave her in the forest. Morozko will find her and make her a princess of the forest and give her jewels and gifts." And so she does this. And so she leaves her own daughter in the forest, and Morozko comes around and finds her, and she's cold and she's shivering. And he says, "Child, are you warm?" But this little girl is not stoic and she's not gracious. And so she kind of mouths off to him a little bit like, "Are you kidding me? No, I'm freezing out here." And so he freezes her. Now, this is probably a story that it's got like a real, like I said, Morozko looks like a Santa Claus character. There's even a version called Ded Moroz, which is like the Russian Santa Claus almost. So there's a little bit of a naughty list, nice list kind of vibe to this. And it's probably a story that developed to get Russian children to not complain about being Russian children. If you complain about how cold it is, Morozko will freeze you. But what we take from the mythology is that if you meet the cold with stoicism and grace, it will bestow great gifts upon you. And so when we got into this whole taking ice baths for our own health, wellness, vitality, mentality kind of culture, it was very important to us to meet the cold with stoicism and grace. So we weren't coming at it from this like attack it like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna get in there cold, I'm gonna grin a bear." It was about surrender. It was about really kind of getting to a calm, meditative space, not only so that we could stay in longer, because we're not fighting it. You can always spend more time in surrender than you can in combat. And tying different responses to the stimulus. Because I've been doing ice baths for years now, and I tell people they're like, "Oh, so you really like this?" I'm like, "No, it's uncomfortable as fuck." Like, no, yep. Every time I stand there in front of it, I look and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? This is, it's never going to tickle. It's never going to be like, yeah,
this feels good.
This feels great. But
yep,
we tie different responses to the stimulus by meeting it with stoicism and grace. And so it helps us get back in it. It helps us go back the next day and the day after that, because one of the greatest lessons is that, and this is a kind of a Viktor Frankl quote, that there's the space between stimulus and response, and in that space is our ability to choose our response. And in that ability, I can't remember the rest of the quote, but by navigating that space between the stimulus and response and understanding, I can choose my response. I can get into freezing cold water. And if I'm like, "Oh, this sucks, but I'm doing it. Oh, fuck this. Goddamn. I'm choosing that response, and I'm choosing to dump cortisol into my system. And that's a stress response. And if we were tying that stimulus to that response, but if we choose a different response, if we choose like a this is uncomfortable, but I know it's not harmful to me, and I can be calm and I can focus on my breath and I can be mindful, then that not only helps us develop a more consistent practice with the cold to get all of the other benefits of the therapy, but we can apply that to other parts of our life. So now we can apply that to traffic. We can apply that to relationships. We can apply that to business. We can apply that to stepping away from alcohol. And being like, now I have more choice. Like I can choose to respond to this stimulus in a different way. And so that's kind of the part of the creation of the name and where the name comes from. Now, why the hell did we get into this in the first place? And it goes back to so there's a couple of different arcs to this story that happen at the same time. And one of them is my wife and business partner, Adrian. She got sick. We were a few years into our relationship and in our early 30s. And she started developing very rapidly and very strangely a lot of physical symptoms. There was some rapid weight gain. It was like 50 pounds within a couple of months, some lethargy, joint pain, allergic responses. So like foods, botanicals, fragrances that she'd been around her entire life were now like giving her hives, burning up her esophagus, skin flushing. And through all of the biological, physiological symptoms that she was manifesting, there also, was a drop in self-esteem. She didn't like who she was seeing in the mirror. She felt like she was becoming disempowered in her own life because she didn't have energy. She didn't have vitality anymore. She can figure out like, what the hell is going on with me? Why is all of a sudden my body turning against me? So she started going to doctors. A lot of them really didn't have any answers for her. But eventually she ended up with a few autoimmune diagnoses. And one of them is Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And so that's a glandular issue where the thyroid gland, and I tell people I'm an engineer, not a doctor, but the thyroid gland is just going out of whack. It's not regulating hormones the way that it should. It's kind of like the body is attacking itself for some reason. Another diagnosis was an esophageal autoimmune condition called eosinophilic esophagitis. And this is where foods and botanicals, fragrances were literally giving her hives in her esophagus, which is not only very painful and debilitating, but it's like frightening. Like my throat is closing up because somebody walked in the room with fragrance on. And that's just like your environment is attacking you. And then a skin flushing condition called urticaria. And with these diagnoses, there were medications. One of the most significant ones was Synthroid, which is for the thyroid condition. So endocrinologists, which are thyroid doctors, when they get a patient and they diagnose them with one of these conditions, the paraphrase is, we did some tests and it turns out you have this condition. It's called Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. It means your thyroid is going out of whack. There's nothing that you did to cause this. There's nothing that you can do to reverse this. But fortunately for you, there's a medication that you can take. You take one pill a day for the rest of your life, and it will help you manage the symptoms. And by the way, if you stop taking this medication, you might die. That's a heavy load to put on somebody. But it's the way the culture is. And so she started taking the Synthroid, and then with the allergic reactions, there were 2 live antibody shots a month, a product called Xolair. That she was getting from her allergist. And through these medications, of course, there are side effects. And so there's supplements to manage the side effects. And so there's supplements to manage the side effects of the supplements to manage the side effects of the medications. And so I'm watching this pill bottle on the dresser kind of grow and grow and grow. And something didn't make sense to me because nothing was getting better. Like she wasn't getting healthier. She was still under attack by her environment. The psychological debilitation was there. Still anxiety, stress, depression was all still there. So nothing was getting better. She was just managing. So there's this very acute situation that I'm watching my wife go through. And at the same time, I was working as a pharmaceutical business analyst. My first job after I got out of college, I got an engineering degree after the Army. I didn't go into engineering, but I went to pharmaceutical business analytics. First job that I got was working for a small for-profit pharmaceutical company for a couple of years as a business analyst. And that's just where you're just analyzing data in ways that arrives at answers that people want. When I got out of that, I started working as a consultant for nonprofit hospitals, because I started to learn more about, behind the scenes in the pharmaceutical industry, how products are researched, developed, bought, sold, marketed. And there really is truth to some of the criticisms of the pharmaceutical industry. You can find a million memes on the internet that says the pharmaceutical industry doesn't care about cures, they care about customers. And that's a criticism, that's a judgment, but the observation, the core observation is valid. So much, almost entirely, the Western allopathic medical systems pharmaceutical industry has developed and evolved to almost entirely focus on symptom management, because it's a subscription model. It's you can sell something once, or you can sell a subscription to something for the rest of somebody's life. And it's easy to vilify the pharmaceutical industry, which certainly the internet memes do that. But I always stop at this part of the story and say, overwhelmingly, my experience is that the industry is full of good people who want to do good things. And that's just the best way they know how. They're not focused on trying to get people to make better life choices, because that's hard. To sit somebody down and say, okay, you're pre-diabetic, you're a little obese, you're hypertensive. I think you should exercise. I think you should look at the foods that you're eating, and you should get some fresh air. You should, alleviate your sedentary lifestyle. We could certainly do that, but then, that's essentially on the individual to do that. Or what I could do is I could develop a product, and I can sell that product to you on a subscription service once a month. That's going to make you feel better. It's going to help alleviate the bad feelings associated with essentially your lifestyle choices. And so that's the best thing that people know how to do, is to help manage the symptoms. But they do want to do good things. And I had my wife's situation. I was starting to learn the pharmaceutical industry. I started working for nonprofit hospitals after I got out of the for-profit pharmaceutical industry. I started working as a consultant for nonprofit hospitals, helping them save a bunch of money on their pharmaceutical spend. So if you're a qualifying nonprofit hospital, a significant amount of your patients are going to be economically lower class, no insurance or bad insurance. And so if you take advantage of certain programs, you can save a bunch of money on the drugs that you're buying from the pharmaceutical companies, and you can supply them to your patient populations for a greatly reduced cost. And this is even like a drug that'll cost $5,000. Now you can get it for a penny. And then now you have the ability to give that drug to somebody who doesn't have the insurance to afford it. And so when you first start working in this arm of the healthcare system, you feel like Robin Hood. You're like, yeah, I'm robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, because now the pharmaceutical company has this drug that they're charging $5,000 for. Aha, but now I can make them give it to the nonprofit hospital for a penny, and the nonprofit hospital can give it to the patient. But then I get into that system and I realized that it wasn't that I was stealing money from the rich and giving it to the poor. A lot of times I was stealing poison from the rich and giving it to the poor, because again, it's just a pharmaceutical product. It's just a drug to manage symptoms that has its own side effects. And if you see the pharmaceutical ads, which are all over commercial television, fucking list of side effects at the end, you see, the 65-year-old man with the 45-year-old wife walking the golden retriever on the beach, and they're happy as fuck. They're all thin. They're all smiles. They don't look like patients at all. But the pitch is that if you take this product, if you go to your doctor and demand this product, you get to be the 65-year-old silver fox with the 45-year-old wife and the golden retriever on the beach. And then the list of the side effects at the end, may cause severe diarrhea, heart attacks, heart palpitations, you might die, So I just couldn't accept that the story that Adrienne was getting from her healthcare providers about her lack of power in the situation, her lack of ability to reverse her own disease states, was true. So I just started studying, reading anything I could get my hands on, and experimenting on myself, experimenting with things like my diet, like reducing processed foods, reducing sugars, carbohydrates, ketogenic dieting, extended and intermittent fasting, so like 1 meal a day, going to 2-3 day fasts. And then environmental exposure was something that I brought in to my experimentation. So I was sleeping on the ground in my backyard in Phoenix, Arizona in the summertime. It doesn't get lower than 105 degrees at night. And then leaving the windows open and the air conditioner off, and experiencing the cold, jumping in my pool in the winter and not turning on the heat in my car on my morning commutes, and just dressing down, not bundling up, even if it's 50 degrees in Phoenix, understanding it might be uncomfortable, but it's not a harmful level of cold. It's just, why do I have to have that big winter coat? Well, that got me into ice baths. And Adrienne started following me around on this journey, experimenting with her own diet, with fasting, and with the cold exposure. And she started experiencing benefits. She started, reducing the supplements that she was taking, because she was no longer experiencing the side effects. And that got down to the pharmaceutical products that she was taking, and weaned herself off of all of that, and reversed all of her autoimmune conditions, and has been medication free for years now. And so that was kind of what got us into the culture, was just, solving problems for ourselves. And it just kind of so happened that through this process, we started following hashtags on social media. We started, getting into Wim Hof, the Dutch, breathwork cold guy. Hashtag ice bath, hashtag breathwork, hashtag wellness, hashtag Wim Hof. And, so you're getting connected to all these other people who are getting into this, and they're posting about it, and realizing that what we were doing was not just unique to solving our own problems, that there were a lot of people out there working on a lot of different issues that were looking to use ice baths and other modalities to take charge of their own health outcomes. And they wanted to be able to do it more often, and they wanted to be able to do it in their own home. And there was nothing out there, no solution out there really, unless you're Tony Robbins paying $50,000 to get an in-ground cold plunge. There was nothing out there that a person could just buy as a home appliance and put it into their house, into their home gym. And so I had created my own backyard Frankenforge, engineering project by tearing apart some dorm refrigerators and insulating a steel tub. And so I had my all the time ice bath. And I'm like, how do I make something that I could ship, that I could sell, that people would buy, and put a brand on it, and put a culture on it. And that was kind of the creation myth of the story. And so, yeah, I mean, this could go on for an hour and a half, but I think that's a good place to pause and say that that was kind of the creation of what got us into this, and how we kind of woke up to a true market need, that there were people out there who were looking for a solution that didn't have anything. And so we just started doing our best to offer what we could. And it's been quite a journey ever since. So I'm going to pause there.
That's a hell of a story.
Thank you.
I'm grateful you shared that, because that's the name behind the brand, and the why behind it. I think for people listening, that's, you took control of your health, taking radical responsibility for your health. And that's what I hear you saying. And for people listening, that's why I do it.
Yeah.
That's why I get in the cold. It's my greatest teacher.
Absolutely. And I'll say, one of the things in my reading, when I said I just started reading everything, and I developed this kind of this rule of thumb with the books that I was reading, because it wasn't just nonfiction self-help. There was that, but there was also old fiction. And so if it was almost entirely, not exclusively, almost entirely, if I was reading nonfiction like self-help or physiology, psychology, stress management, they were very new books, right? It was the hottest stuff that's out there. But I was also reading fiction, old novels. And the rule of thumb was that to read fiction, the book has to have first been published at least 50 years ago. It has to be still culturally significant. So you can go to Barnes and Noble and find it new on the shelf, right? So this thing is still in print. And the reason for that is that if a work of fiction is at least 50 years old or older, and it's still being taught, it's still sitting on the shelf, it's still in print, there's a reason for that. Now, what that reason is, you're going to have to open the book or listen to the audiobook and find out. But there's obviously something that stretches at least 3 generations, because if it was first published 50 years ago, that meant that like our grandparents were adults when that book was first published. It became notable, you know, enough to keep being printed through our parents' generation, and then it's into at least a 3rd generation. Some of them are older than that.
Staying relevant
For some reason, somehow, some way. This narrative, this fictional story, it's not history in the nonfiction sense where it's some historian like codifying the facts, but it's a narrative that has enough of a snapshot of that culture, and there's universal wisdom and truth in that is propagated through a few generations. And so what I found in those old fictions, John Steinbeck was a big one, actually. Great novels about, you know, the early 1900 American like Western development. What I found in those and old science fiction ones, like science fiction novels, Robert A. Heinlein and Kurt Vonnegut from like the 60s, there's some deep wisdom in those as well. But what I found was this understanding that we used to be, and it made sense, you know, it makes sense when you say it out loud, that we used to have to respond to our environment, to our temperature volatilities, to our seasons a lot more than we do now. And we used to, like, fasting used to be much more common. You tell, if you're not really, if your social network or your familiar network is not really into the health and wellness stuff, you tell people that you start fasting and they're worried you're going to starve to death. Like, what do you mean? You're going a day without food? You are flirting with death. Like, no, I'm really not. And actually, that perspective is extremely new. Like, it's not even our great grandparents' age. Like, our great grandparents knew that, like, once a year they were going to go through some, like, a lot of religious traditions have, you know, encoded in them, like fasting rituals. Like, people used to go on a 10-day fast once a year just because that's what you did. And you get, you know, further back in human evolution in pre-agrarian cultures, and it wasn't like a choice to fast. It was like, no, I just didn't find food today, because you don't find food every day.
The tribe is looking for food.
The tribe looks for food every day, and some days we find it. You know, some days we don't. And so you go to sleep, you wake up, and you try again. And this is same with the temperature volatility. You know, we're in the digital revolution now. We just came out of the industrial revolution, but things like refrigeration, air conditioning, car air conditioning, going from our houses to our cars to our offices and back, and in this like constant 75-degree environment is very new. We're all descended from earlier humans who walked barefoot and naked across snow, across glaciers, tracking hoofed animals, trying to get one of them. Maybe one day you get one, maybe one day you don't. Foraging for berries, shit like that. This is how our physiological, our biological systems develop. This is what we're supposed to be dealing with, and we're just not anymore. And so our medical system, our healthcare system, has also evolved along the same lines, where we're so many generations in, where you tell a person that you're going to reverse your own autoimmune chronic illness, and like, you can't do that. That's impossible. And it's not impossible. It's just kind of out of the cultural perception that it is possible. And I don't remember where I started that rant, but yeah, it's just that understanding that we're so many generations into this, that it's difficult. You have to kind of step outside of the culture, and you have to kind of reject the common wisdoms, because the common wisdoms aren't very wise anymore. They're the ones like, you're skipping snack time in between breakfast and lunch. Are you trying to starve yourself? No, that's very far away from starving myself. That's actually a much more natural way for me to be.
One of the books that you reference that I know you are passionate about, and it's the hashtag you use, Antifragile.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really want you to talk about is the hormetic stress response. For people listening, like, from a very basic elementary understanding, for people listening, what is the hormetic stress response, Jason, and why is it important?
Sure. So Antifragile, a book written by a man named Nassim Taleb, and he's a Lebanese-American stock trader, professor of mathematics, and linguist. And he outlines in this book, Antifragile, his hypothesis, his theory, that there are certain levels of stress that actually lead to growth. And it makes sense when you say it out loud. And he applies this a lot in like economic and social systems. And so we have to have like economic systems that are being stressed. Otherwise, we build them up and we artificially save them from small failures. And so they end up with catastrophic failures. And so this goes into like economic recessions and like housing market bubbles, because if we're not letting the housing market kind of go up and down like this, it's going to go way up and then it's going to go way down. But there's a biological aspect to it as well, and that's the hormetic stress response. And so you can think of this as if I want a tree to grow taller, I'll prune its lower branches. The tree doesn't just grow back the branches that you cut off, it actually grows a little bit taller and bounds up. If I want to build my muscles, I can go to the gym and I can lift heavy weights, and I'm actually tearing my muscles tissue. This is a small amount of trauma to the body. And my body doesn't just go back to the way it was. It actually rebounds and prepares for more stress. And so the hormetic stress response is this kind of specific types of response or stresses that have a expectation of growth or rebounding, or like, I'll become better now. And so that was a big, one of the more pivotal books that I read. Nassim Taleb, he ties this back a lot to old Stoic philosophers. And so from there, I started reading old Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, and realizing that they had in their routines and their regimens intentionally introduced discomfort. Mm-hmm. They would be uncomfortable on purpose. And these are Greeks and Romans, 2,000 years ago. So their life is probably, relatively speaking, was still already uncomfortable for us. But taking time out of the year or they would walk barefoot instead of in sandals, or they would sleep on the ground, or they would wear burlap instead of like, more softer materials. And there was this understanding that too much comfort is not a good thing. And there's another book I read recently called The Comfort Crisis, which goes into this a little bit. But this understanding that, generations ago, we didn't have a choice. We had to be uncomfortable. I didn't have my great-grandparents didn't have central air conditioning. My great-grandparents, was at a grocery store yesterday and bought, we're in Bend, Oregon, and it's February, and I'm surrounded by dragon fruit and oranges, fresh strawberries, and it's an absurdity on like a very short timeline. 100 years ago, you had to
you're not getting fruit in the wintertime.
You're not getting fruit in the wintertime. No. I still bought the dragon fruit. It was still delicious, but just understanding these that our hardships were forced on us, and there's a lot of good that has come from the Industrial Revolution and the digital revolution. We're doing something good right now that is a product of the Industrial and Digital Revolution, a podcast that's going to be broadcast out to people. And going back to the alcohol sobriety, we can find our little tribes and find what resonates with us. It's no longer just, either you're a factory worker who gets drunk and yells at his wife every day, or you're an alcoholic in AA. That was like that was the two sides of the coin in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. You could do this, you could do that. Now there's other methods. And so that there's good things that come from those revolutions, but there's also externalities. And we have to understand the unintended consequence of food abundance, of climate control, of technological advancement. We have to understand that it's not all good. Like there's some downsides to that as well. And if we're not paying attention to that, one kernel of trauma or misalignment that is unattended to can start to fester and propagate out through our biological systems, our relationships, and everything from there. And so that's really kind of ultimately what I seek to do, is to remind people that the technology genie's out of the bottle, the industrial genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in the bottle, but ask yourself, okay, what does this new technology, what does this industrial process do for us, but what does it also take from us? And how do we need to kind of manage and balance the positives and the negatives, so that those negatives are not manifesting into our bodies and our relationships and our society?
Well, I think the best part, I want to acknowledge you again, because you created, by taking radical responsibility, you created a product with your Morozko Forge, the Ferrari of ice baths, the Ferrari of cold tubs. Your product, Jason, creates a hormetic stress response and is very uncomfortable for people who, whether it's your product, whether it's a cold shower, whether it's the cold lake, whatever, whether it's a horse trough, by us sitting in that cold water, it's creating a hormetic stress response and it makes it stronger.
Yeah, that's the idea. And we always say, you know, any amount of cold is a good amount of cold, and whatever gets you cold, we're very, you know, one of the things, it was kind of an accident that I ended up creating the Ferrari of ice baths, just because being first in this space and in a backyard project, you know, I was just doing the best that I can, and it ended up being kind of like a luxury product. There's a lot of other companies that have come up who are offering different price points and different products, and I love that. And at the end of the day, like if all you have is a river that's, you know, 20 miles away, or a pool in the winter, or just dressing down in the winter, or even a bowl of ice water, you know, a bowl of ice water, you do your face, your hands, your feet in that order, so you're not putting your face in your foot water. That's good as well, you know, cold at the back of the neck. And so it's a very elegant therapy. It's at the end, it's not easy to create a bath of freezing cold water. But at the end of the day, it's just cold water. You know, it's not some sort of magic elixir that has to be put through some sort of, you know, centrifuge in a factory somewhere. It's cold water. Get in the cold water, feel that discomfort, understand, start to learn the difference between discomfort and harm. And I think that's one of the things that the industrial and digital revolutions have kind of facilitated a loss of, is understanding that discomfort is not harm. Those are things, they're similar. Like harm is uncomfortable, but sometimes harm is comfortable. And just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean it's harmful. And so learning to kind of separate that and learning, you know, the difference between the two is one of the most elegant parts of the therapy.
So for people listening, like Jason just said, there's so many ways to expose yourself to the cold water, cold shower, river, buy the Ferrari of cold tubs, and, you know, Morozko Forge, which, or get a horse trough for $150 and fill it up with cold water. There's so many ways to create your hormetic stress response, to get uncomfortable. And, you know, the opportunity to surrender to when you get in that cold water versus fighting it, and the impact it has in every other area of your life. So when you're sitting in traffic and somebody cuts you off, you're able to respond consciously versus react unconsciously. That's what the cold water has taught me. And so I want to acknowledge you again, Jason, for how you're showing up in the world, your new sobriety, giving other men permission to share and be vulnerable, and you know, the accountability that you're promoting. And it's not a one size fits all. So what works for Jason, what works for me, might not work for everybody else. And so just finding your path and your tribe, I think, is really important. And I think for people listening, start with your cold water exposure. It's been a game changer for me. And how do people listening, Jason, if they want to find out more about the Ferrari of cold tubs, where do they go?
So our website, morozkoforge.com, that's MOROZKOFORGE.com. And it's got the product. And we also have just a lot of content on there as well about why and what are the different physiological, psychological benefits to the therapy itself. And I do also want to, something that recently that happened, I think is pretty funny. I'm not really big into Facebook. I mean, I turned Facebook off a few years ago, but recently I turned one back on just because we were running some sponsored ads or something like that. And I found there's like DIY cold plunge groups on Facebook. And so I joined a couple of those, and it's been interesting to watch people who have, you know, the desire, the means to have like a little workshop in their garage, and they're putting together these DIY like cold baths. And sometimes I'll drop into the comments and people don't know who the fuck I am. But I'll just give little hints and tricks like, oh, have you thought about like maybe insulating it here a little bit like that, or maybe like putting this over here like that? Oh wow, yeah, I didn't think of that. And I see people, whether they've seen my product or not, I have no idea, but I see people kind of like creating these solutions that look very similar to the product that I created. And I don't know, it could be completely natural that that's just what made sense to them, because that's what made sense to us. And so it's so if you're on the Facebook platform, you can also drop into some of those DIY groups, and they're amazing communities of people who just want to get into this elegant therapy. And so, yeah, if you're in the market for the Ferrari of ice baths, then I'm in the market to sell one to you. But any amount of cold is a good amount of cold, and there's so many different ways to access this therapy that it's really amazing. And we're here to support all of it. We're here to support not just the how, but the why. And yeah, please do reach out and drop us a line on social media or on our website, and we'd love to talk to you.
Awesome, man. Well, Jason, I appreciate you coming on. We'll do round 2 soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people listening, a lot of value, so many things that we talked about that great takeaways. And I'll also reference all the books Jason talks about in the show notes, as well as how to find Jason and find out more information about the Ferrari of cold tubs. I have a lot of friends who have these cold tubs, and they are the best in the marketplace, and highly recommend. And so, Jason, appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.
We'll do it again soon.
All right.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Until next time. See ya.